Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It's probably one of the first nights when we can actually say, let's hope this is the last dry day for a while. Following the extremely wet winter that we've had, it seems unusual to say that, but I'm sure some of you are suffering more severe drought circumstances than we are here in Madroylin in West Wales. Subject tonight is the key characteristics of top third businesses. And I've sort of broken it down into 4 areas. To start off with, just to summarise what aren't the key features of top third businesses, just to sort of encapsulate certain factors that don't actually tell us whether it's a top third business or not. I'll then move on to the second area, which would be to look at the financial aspects of top third businesses. Thirdly, technical aspects of top third businesses, and I'm sure that you'll all appreciate that those two do tend to go hand in hand. And then finally, how can you make a difference to the performance of your business? So some take-home messages perhaps from some of the data that we're going to go through. I think it's useful just to start with defining what I mean by top third. So in terms of the way that I've looked at top third businesses, these are ranked by profit using actual data. So the sources of data that I've used tonight are some of the outputs from the red meat benchmarking data, which probably many of you were involved with. So providing some of the crucial data around suckler cows and breeding sheep. I've also used some farm business survey figures, again for beef and sheep. And then for dairy figures, I've used our own in-house Cara dairy benchmark, which we produce every year for all our dairy customers. And use that as a way of ranking performance and looking for areas where customers might want to produce. So all the data sources are pretty robust. We try and cross-check them to make sure that they're representative. As a business, we collect quite a lot of management information for businesses through the red meat sector, the dairy sector, the arable sector. So I can hand on heart say that this is accurate and actual data. Why are we ranking by profit? I think this should be the objective of all businesses. It is probably the main reason why people are in business is to make a profit, to optimise the profits from the resources that are available. Profit has in the past perhaps been seen as a bit of a dirty word, but at the end of the day, every business needs to make a profit to pay yourselves, pay the partners or the directors, to be able to pay any potential tax liability and to reinvest in the business and cover any capital repayments on any debt. So a very, very simple definition is that profit is the financial gain from business activity minus expenses. It is different to cash, and I'm not going to go into any long-winded explanations on the difference between profit, cash and capital. But just to say that when I'm talking about a top third business, I'm talking about the most profitable businesses within that particular sector. So let's start with what are not the key features of top third businesses. First of all, size. Size of enterprise, size of business is a really poor predictor of profit in any sector. Actually, in quite a few circumstances, we do see that enterprise size or business size runs in the opposite direction to profit. So there are many instances where actually getting bigger has been detrimental to the profit of that business. So biggest isn't always best. And actually in our data sets, certainly for the last few years, it has been some of the medium-sized enterprises perhaps that have been more profitable than the larger enterprises. Yield or output per unit is not a good profit guide. Prolificacy of ewes or the yield per cow in terms of milk output, weight, size of calf, none of these are particularly good guides to the profit of that business. Sometimes they're easy figures to quote, and sometimes there tends to be a little bit of boasting about who produces the most and who's got the heaviest, but it doesn't really give a guide to profitability. Nor does the system employed or following fashion to a degree. We do tend to see some cyclic fashions in the agricultural industry. Some businesses seem to dip in and out of some of the fashions. And unfortunately, just looking at the system that's utilised again is not a particularly good predictor of whether that business is profitable or not. The amount spent on infrastructure and kit, not a good predictor of profitability. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses that feature on the front page of the farming press doesn't necessarily mean that they're either profitable or within the top third. One of my personal bugbears, I guess, is some of the farming press running articles along the lines of "this is what a £1 million lambing shed looks like." Doesn't necessarily mean it's a profitable lambing shed, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that we should aspire to. What we really want articles about is those businesses that are in the top third that are doing things that we can all relate to. So these are not key features of top third businesses. So more importantly, I guess we want to know what are the key features. And before we get into the finances and the technical side, after 22 years as an agricultural consultant, one of the main key criteria of a top third business is actually the people or the person who's running that business. And a lot of it's about their skills, their attitude, and their outlook. And one of my esteemed colleagues, Wendy, shared with me a couple of years ago a good saying about the 3 types of farmer. So there are generally 3 types of farmer. There are those who make it happen, those who watch it happen, and those think, looking at what just happened. So I think the top third generally fall into the first category of making things happen. So a lot of this is about the people. But some of these messages I'm going to give you now are things that hopefully everybody can relate to and implement in their own business. So if you look at financial aspects of top third businesses, and it's probably worthwhile just encapsulating what is the difference between top and bottom. So in the beef and sheep sector, if we look at the red meat sector in the Farm Business Survey details, we're looking at a difference in profitability of around £50,000 per annum. And bearing in mind with these that we are talking about similar sized farms, so somewhere around 100, 105 hectares, with around 30 suckler cows and somewhere around 450 to 500 ewes. So the actual size of farms are very similar between the top third and the bottom third. The difference in profit is quite stark in being £50,000 per annum. If we look at the same difference in the dairy sector, then we're looking at a difference in profit of around £220,000 per annum, difference between top and bottom. Again, the businesses within top and bottom thirds are similar sized in terms of land area, and slightly bigger herds in the bottom third than the top third. But if we looked at the numbers there, they're around 240, 250 cows within that business. And I'm afraid there is one aspect that no matter how you look at the finances of any of the top third businesses, there is one aspect that jumps out at you, and it is cost. And when I looked at all the different sectors, be it upland, lowland, beef and sheep, dairy, purely sheep, purely beef, all of the top third businesses have lower costs for every particular cost centre except one. So all top third businesses had lower variable costs and lower fixed costs, being power and labour and property costs. But the only cost difference between top third and bottom third, where top third are actually paying more, is forage costs. And bearing in mind that the data I'm looking at is obviously very much biased towards Wales, and our particular dairy benchmark data that we produce is perhaps centred more towards West Wales. So particularly good grass growing areas where there are a lot of enterprises concentrating on forage-based production. But even then, the top third businesses are still spending more on fertiliser, seeds, sprays, lime every year. And I think one of the key drivers that we've seen on our benchmarks, and it correlates well across the red meat sector also, is that the amount of grass grown and utilised on livestock farms is actually the key profit driver. And although there's some technical aspects amongst that, which we'll get to later on, from a financial point of view, then forage costs is the one area where perhaps as a business we can afford to spend a little bit more to improve the quality of what we're growing and to make it more readily available to the livestock that we're getting to utilise it. So, taking forage apart and looking at some of the other key cost centres that the top third businesses are managing particularly well. Feed, I guess, no surprises, is the biggest cost on most livestock farms, certainly within the dairy sector. And the range of money spent on feed is huge. But the top third within every sector are spending less on feed per unit. So within the suckler cow sector, there's a difference of £110 per cow in purchase feed cost. In the dairy sector, there's a difference of £360 per cow in the feed cost. And in the lowland sheep sector, just as an example, there's £5 per ewe difference in feed cost. So feed is one of the cost centres that these top third businesses are managing particularly well. So purchase feed, is it necessary? Well, of course, purchase feed is necessary. Feed rates that we see on farm and the response to the feed rates varies so dramatically. So what I'm saying here, and I guess learning lessons from what the top third is, that it's feeding the right amount of the right feed at the right time. And I appreciate that that sounds a bit woolly, but there's an awful lot of businesses who are chasing output by feeding heavily, in some cases extremely heavily, and just not getting an economic response out of it. And I think certainly in the geographic area that we're farming in and working in, then making sure that grazing quality and the silage quality and the grass quantity and the input from the other forages is right first is the key. And then looking at purchase feed as an additive on top of that to tweak performance. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be feeding. I'm just saying that businesses that manage feed cost tend to make more money and tend to appear quite regularly in the top third. The other thing with feed is that at any given feed rate, there's a difference in cost per unit. So there's a difference in pounds per tonne. So one of the key things that I found amongst these top third businesses is that loyalty they appreciate can cost them money at the end of the day, and they're willing to shop around and look for at least comparative prices if they're not going to move, but comparative prices also to move and to reduce their cost base. And as one customer told me, who was milking about 130 cows and was probably in the top 10% of profitability, he'd far rather spend 15 minutes after breakfast every day phoning around for prices than milking another 25 cows. And he still to this day is quite happy to phone around for dairy chemicals, for feed, for parlour sundries, for electricity, for insurance, and he will go through the process every year because he can save far more money than milking those extra cows would ever make him. So feed is an area that we really got to look at. It is, again, something that we'll touch on a little bit later when we talk about technical issues. But I think we've got to set ourselves a realistic budget on feed and try and stick to it. And control our feed rates is key. And this is coming out every time when we're looking at top third businesses compared to the rest. The second big cost difference is power costs. Now, when we talk about power costs, we've obviously got tractor running costs being fuel and repair bills. There's a degree of contractor costs in there. There's the depreciation of the machines and also the finance that's related to purchase of those machines. As you can see towards the bottom of the slide there, although the difference in the sheep sector is not quite as pronounced as it is within the cattle sector, there's a huge amount of difference in terms of power costs between the top third and the bottom third. So how are some of these businesses in the top third managing to do what in essence is pretty well the same jobs for less money? So they're all providing ample forage for their cattle and sheep. They're managing to get the day-to-day tasks done as need be, but doing it for a cheaper cost. So one of the areas that we definitely need to look at is, first of all, have you got the right balance of equipment, age of equipment, the power of the equipment, and finance related to equipment? It's, as I say, I've been a consultant for probably 22, 23 years now. When I first started, I would never see a beef and sheep farm with anything much bigger than a 90 horsepower tractor. Yet on my travels now, I see quite a lot of beef and sheep farmers with 150, 160 horsepower tractors. Same in the dairy sector. When I started, it was quite rare to see a dairy farmer with a brand new tractor, whereas now it seems to be quite common. I'm not saying that tractors are evil, and I'm not saying that new machinery is against all financial principles, but we need to be careful in terms of what we're spending, and perhaps appreciate that a new machine isn't always going to do a better job than the reliable old machine. I think it's one thing that we see with bigger businesses is perhaps giving some responsibility for machinery maintenance to members of staff. So making some members of staff responsible for specific bits of equipment and greasing it and making sure it's maintained in good condition. That can be a good way of keeping some control over your cost. The other thing in the bigger businesses, and my mentor up in North Yorkshire always used to say when he went to a farm, how many tractors have you and how many people work here and who's the clever so-and-so who can drive two at a time. And although there is a bit of amusement in that, there's also some grains of truth in that if we've got more tractors than men, we've got an expensive piece of kit on the yard that's not delivering us any benefit to the business. Some of these top third businesses then are looking at a bit more innovative approach to machinery. So things like for machines that aren't going to be employed for the year round, can we hire them in? Can we share it with a neighbour? Can we borrow something from a neighbour and lend them something back in its place? And I think, you know, if we did a bit more collaboration, and certainly I've seen this in quite a few of the top third businesses, whereby, for example, Farmer A has a mower and Farmer B has a tedder and rake, and they work together to produce the winter forage. Or perhaps one of them will have a baler and the neighbour will have the mower and the wrapper. But it's a good way of controlling depreciation, so not each business is having to carry the huge burden of the depreciation or the HP costs for all the equipment. It also helps in terms of labour, so generally neighbours come over to help each other. But it also means that you haven't got huge amounts of kit lying idle for as long as it would have been if it's going to be employed on 2 units instead of 1. And I think when we look at some of these top third businesses, they certainly are a little bit leaner on power and machinery in terms of what's sat on the yard, and some of those businesses in the bottom. Unfortunately, I can't hand on heart say that all the most profitable businesses use contractors and all the least profitable businesses do everything themselves, because it's not as clear cut as that. And I think if you are a business, and perhaps a larger business, that wants to run your own kit, I think one of the important things that I've seen is that those who can do it profitably are, I suppose, pretty good with a spanner and are able to maintain the machinery themselves. Cost-wise, as I said, as the main take-home message from costs, all the top third businesses have lower cost centres in every aspect apart from Forage. The difference in some of these costs between top third and bottom third wasn't huge, but the cumulative effect of cost meant that added together, it made quite a big difference on profitability. Focus on forage quality and quantity, and actually spending more on those areas is going to be conducive to improving profit on your business. Shop around and compare prices. You know, we probably should put a bit more value on admin time and time spent actually shopping around and comparing prices, because you can only spend the money once. Look at feed usage specifically. Is it targeted? Is it necessary? Is it providing a benefit? Is there a cheaper way of doing it? Is there a cheaper product of similar quality? Benchmark. As Gwen mentioned at the start of the meeting, there are some more discussion groups coming with Farming Connect. They're a brilliant way of getting into benchmarking and comparing some of your financial costs. Because at the end of the day, if you don't measure it and compare it, you don't know whether you're good, bad, indifferent, and you don't know whether it can be improved. Power costs. Do you need the kit? Is there a better way of doing it? Can you share, hire? Do you have to have the machine there all year round? And finally, in terms of finances, make every penny a prisoner. As I said, you can only spend it once. Hold on tight to your money, because everybody else wants some of it. So, technical aspects of top third businesses. I think it's fair to say all sectors should strive for exceptional technical performance before thinking of growing in size. You know, if as a dairy farm, you're not making money out of 150 cows, probably the worst thing that you can do is get 200 cows. Similarly, if you're lambing 1,000 ewes and you're not making enough money out of it, getting 1,500 ewes is probably not going to be the answer. So look to do the job as well as you can with what you've got before you even think of getting bigger. And although it hurts to say, for some businesses, a higher cost can usually be due to a lower level of technical performance, particularly within feed cost. Sometimes a higher feed cost is hiding the fact that the forage management isn't particularly good, or the allocation of the feed isn't accurate enough, or the grouping of the animals of the stock isn't good enough. In my experience, profitability does seem to be directly proportional to the system simplicity. And one of the add-ons of that is that a simple system tends to help labour efficiency. There are a certain number of farmers, I'm sure, wake up every morning and ask themselves, how complicated can I make it today? But I was told many years ago by one of the pioneering spring carvers in Carmarthenshire that he operated on the KISS theory, which was keep it simple, stupid. So keep things as simple as possible. It's easier to communicate with the staff and the contractors and family members, the protocols, and it aids profitability. Key aspects, cross-sector, forage utilisation, hugely important. Fertility of breeding stock and replacement rate. Those are the three key technical aspects that it's perhaps worth concentrating on. I suppose at this point it's worth saying the people in the top third don't get hung up on some of the areas where they can't have any influence whatsoever. So they can't have a direct influence on the deadweight price that they're getting for the lambs at that particular time. They can't have a direct impact on the headline milk price that they're receiving. But things like stocking rate and improving fertility and concentrating on replacement rate are all within their control. And that's where they expend their energy, on the things that they actually have control over. So forage utilisation, stocking rate. These are Farm Business Survey results, and I think that it's quite clear to see that the top third businesses are getting more out of the same. So the stocking rates on the top third businesses are always somewhat heavier than they are in the average and in the bottom third. So how can you influence it? Grazing systems obviously is an easy way to influence it. There's been plenty of press and plenty of Farming Connect information and webinars about rotational grazing. You know, if you do nothing else, just using an electric fence to subdivide some of the bigger fields up, or putting a back fence up behind some of the animals, will make a difference to how much grass you can grow, how quick we get regrowth, and therefore how much grass we can get into the animals. Length of the season, quite important. You know, there's no point in making more silage so that you can keep animals in longer, so that you can make more silage so you can keep them in longer. Let's try and keep them out as long as we can where possible. The other thing is with all these things is, you know, measure the grass and allocate it. I always think of some of the farms that use TMR feeder wagons. They will measure every last ingredient during winter and how much intake is, and get to the spring and open the gate and say, there you are. So measure, know how much they need, know how much you can give them, and use a fence to subdivide fields, and you'll be quite surprised how much more grass you can grow simply by implementing fairly cheap and fairly simple methods, just to be able to make better regrowth and better grass available. So stocking rate is one measure. There's two factors on our dairy benchmark that track profitability every single year. One of those is yield from forage, and the other is fertility. And when we look at yield from forage, so the amount of milk gained from grass and silage, the top third farms are getting an extra 3,000 litres per hectare from forage, and that's worth around £315 a hectare. Beef and sheep sector, you know, I've got some real switched on customers now who are measuring the grass growth, measuring the allocations, but also measuring their live weight or per hectare that they're stocking at, or the dead weight sales per hectare, and using that as a bit of a benchmark to compare with other farms and to see whether they can increase those numbers. So if nothing else, measure how much forage produced is a good starting point. And look if you can produce more. And if you can do that, then there's the opportunity to either increase stock, or a year like this year where we're perhaps going to struggle with forage, if you can improve grassland management and make a bit more grass, the surplus grass that you produce is probably going to have quite a nice economic value to it. So if you can't get more stock onto it, there's going to be a ready market for the selling of round bale silage, or even some grazing. Fertility measures, again, absolutely key. And whether we're, you know, milking, so whether we're milking goats, milking cows, milking sheep, whether we're producing store or fat lambs to sell, or suckled calves, they're all driven by producing offspring. And I think at times we find it easy to lose sight of that, but we need to get as many calves and as many lambs alive per annum as possible, because that is one of the key drivers of profitability. It's an easy thing to measure. You know, what percentage of the cows calve each year, what percentage of ewes presented to the ram produce lambs each year, and then how many lambs do we average per ewe. It's really basic stuff. But in terms of the top third businesses, they are achieving roughly 7 to 8% more calves per year per cow. So, for example, in the dairy sector, for every 100 cows in the herd, the average farmer produces around 68 calves. The top third guys are producing 75, 76 calves. And there's similar figures out there for the sheep sector and the suckler cow sector, and the top third are just getting more live births per year. So benchmark your results against others and be critical. we're not going to make progress, and we're not going to get near to the top third if we're not critical of what we're doing and looking for areas to improve. We can all improve in some areas. And I think in terms of some of the technical issues, you know, have a go. Like I was saying with the electric fencing, have a go. If it fails, at least there's a lesson to be learned that it didn't work and maybe need to adapt. But failure sometimes are some of the best lessons that we can learn, and they're the things that are going to drive us to do it better or to try something slightly different. Replacement rate is the last technical measure, and this is one that we really can manage. And I've put there a reasonable replacement rate is critical, because actually too low a replacement rate can be as bad as too high a replacement rate. Too low a replacement rate means that the breeding herd or breeding flock tends to get a bit of age about them. Once they get a bit of age about them, then vet and med bills tend to go up dramatically. Too high a replacement rate, and we never actually get the stock to being into their most productive age band, because we've got too many youngsters coming in, and it forces our hand to perhaps cull out animals that we shouldn't be thinking of. Very, very broad, but 20% in a flock of breeding ewes, 15% in a suckler herd, and 25% in a dairy herd, roughly there or thereabouts. Does depend a little bit on system. So some of the more intensive, larger house dairy herds are probably running at 30-32% replacement rate. Some of the less intensive dairy herds might be running at 20%. So these are just broad measures, but measure your replacement rate, and if it's extremely low, are you breeding enough replacements or buying enough replacements? Is it an area that you need to concentrate on? And similarly, if your replacement rate is too high, why is it too high? Is it that you've got too many animals leaving the herd for one specific reason? Have you got too many deaths? Have you got a lot of mastitis? Have you got a lot of cod in the sheep? Is there areas that you can measure to see why animals are leaving the herd and what you can do about it? One of my customers, who again is in the top third, one of his key measures that he looks at every year is the number of dead animals he has leaving the farm. And as he quite rightly said, if it leaves the yard for nothing, it never leaves the yard for nothing, because I have to pay to have it taken away. A, I've failed that animal, and B, I've paid to have an animal taken away, which actually, if I'd had my wits about me a bit earlier, I could have actually had a check for. So replacement rate and death rate, absolutely critical. Measure them and compare them to someone else's and see if you can do something about it. And this is one of the key aspects of these top third businesses, is that they can run consistent replacement rates year in, year out. And it makes their forward planning for the business much easier, because they know exactly how many replacements they're going to need and when. And they know what their budgeted income from stock sales is going to be as well. So it's a simple system, but it's easy to monitor, easy to benchmark. So as I alluded to at the start, some of the key attributes of top third farmers is actually to do with personality. So some of these ladies and gentlemen in the top third all have some of the same characteristics. Attention to detail is critical. Very keen on making sure that they do management protocols right, and that the staff follow management protocols. So attention to detail is great. Ability to generate more output from every hectare. We've seen that in the livestock sector, and it also carries through to the arable sector, where they're achieving more yields from the same outputs per hectare. Performance recording is one of the key aspects we find across top third businesses. They do measure lots of different things, write it down, discuss it, and then act on it. There's quite a few businesses that performance record, and performance recording can be anything from regular weighing of growing stock. It can be recording number of lambs per ewe or scamming percentages. But these top third businesses are measuring all different aspects, writing it down, putting it on the computer software, putting it in an app on the phone, and then actually doing something with the data. So analysing the data, looking for weak spots and looking where they can improve, and picking out some key areas to target over the next period. And cost control. I suppose, jokingly, when I was preparing for this webinar, it would have been easy just to put up a slide saying cost control, because that is the key difference between top third and bottom third. And I know as an industry, we perhaps get a little bit browbeaten about cost control and being told to reduce costs all the time. But the difference between top third and bottom third in terms of cost is huge. Key attributes of bottom third farmers: no idea of cost, don't know what their better med cost is per ewe, don't know what their better med cost pence per litre is in the dairy industry. Accounts out of date and a lack of understanding about what the accounts are telling them. I think getting accounts out in time is crucial. Even better than that is if you do some analysis of your own accounting. So if you do your own VAT or you use some of the management accounting, that data's bang up to date, and just using that as a base to start with is key, and at least understanding the ins and outs. And some of these top third businesses talk like business people and are quite comfortable talking about finances and fully understand some of the implications of some of the changes on the farm. There's a huge amount of different systems. We've got low input and low output. We've got high input and high output, but unfortunately there's a huge number of businesses that are running a high input, low output system, and no matter which sector you're in, whether it's arable, beef, sheep, dairy, high input, low output is not going to make a profit. So if you can benchmark your costs and compare your inputs and your outputs, you'll get a grip of what is possible. An expansion of land area or stock numbers without a return. There are quite a few farms in that bottom third who are bigger in terms of land area or bigger in terms of herd size or flock size than the others, but not actually achieving the profit that should go with it. So aim to be exceptional at what you do first before even considering getting bigger at what you do. How can you make a difference? These are a bit soundbitey, and I appreciate that some of them can be a bit woolly, but I think within here there's probably some quite useful take-home messages. Have a clear vision of what you want the business to achieve is key. Be prepared to embrace change and consider new technologies. Embracing change is a big one. Some of these businesses in the top third have changed, enterprise mix have changed, system of production, and it's not always been successful. And it's that ability to identify failure and to do something about it and actually learn the lessons from something not having gone to plan. So embracing change and being willing to move in a different direction are key. Consider new technologies. As long as they're going to either save time or make data analysis that bit easier, there's some fantastic tools out there that you can get on your smartphones or your laptops or computers that really make some analysis of data really simple. Motivate, reward and communicate effectively with members of staff and family. I think it's really important that, when you're working with husbands and wives and sons and employees, that they appreciate what you're trying to achieve and why. So share with them some of the protocols, share with them perhaps why it's worth producing the milk as cleanly as possible, why it's worth giving the cow that mineral drench, and motivate them and reward them if they do things as they should be, and the results at the other end improve the business. Be prepared to delegate responsibility. Sometimes that's a really good way of motivating staff, is to get them to be responsible, whether it's for a piece of kit or whether it's for the calf rearing enterprise, but get them involved and get them responsible. And the graveyard's full of indispensable people. If you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So measure as much as you can. it's not the system, it's the people behind the system. It's having the attitude is half of it. And go to work with a smile on your face. No one wants to work for or with a miserable person. And sometimes the attitude of the farmer can have huge ramifications on everybody else who's working there. If something's not working, be prepared to change. I think we've said that a couple of times. And also, there's no prizes for having done 14 milkings a week for the past 25 years, or for never having a day off the farm, and for being able to count the flock every day for 25 years. Get away, take a holiday and recharge, and sometimes that can help you to see the wood for the trees. So challenge and be honest with yourselves. Use some relevant key performance indicators, whether that is scanning, whether it's lambs produced per ewe, whether it's weaning weight, weaning age, some of the fertility measures such as pregnancy rate, but record them and look at them and review them regularly and reset targets. Definitely consider a discussion group to enable benchmarking. If you can get in a discussion group with some like-minded people and some of these top third farmers, it really does rub off and it really does open your eyes. Keep the data interesting. Try and use a few key performance indicators rather than reams and reams of data, because that just tends to turn people off. Make mistakes and admit them and learn from them. Be like the air industry, not the health industry. And what that means is that within the air industry, obviously they have these black box recorders. So if anything goes wrong on a flight, if there's an air accident or a near miss, they analyse the data and they put systems and kit in place to make sure it never happens again. Unfortunately, within the health industry, because everything is so litigious now, they really can't admit whether something's worked or not, and therefore they're not able to analyse some of the mistakes and learn from them. Do the simple things well, enough forage, enough clean bedding, plenty of water. The simple things are the things that matter. Get the ewes to the tub, get the cows in calf, get as many offspring born in a year as possible. And be sensitive to cost. Don't ask how much can I spend, but how much do I need to spend? I think the take-home messages from all of this are, as I say, cost is key. Feed and forage, certainly in our area, crucial. Make sure you're efficient before expanding. Measure, record, analyse, embrace change and opportunities, and most importantly, enjoy it. As I have had to say to one or two clients in the past who've got a little bit sort of browbeaten by it all, we're not forced to do it. So if you're doing it out of choice, make sure that you're enjoying. So I hope that's been useful. And I think there's one or two questions maybe.
Yes, so I'll read the questions out to you. So the stocking rate, was it per acre that was in the graph about halfway through?
No, that was per hectare. It's still a little bit disappointing that it's still relatively low, but yeah, stocking rate per hectare is sort of the industry standard.
Okay, and also, was the profit measured excluding the single farm payment?
The profit has included single farm payment, and it's included it across all the data sets.
Okay. Is there a quick win to improve profitability, e.g. cancel PH agreements, HP agreements?
Probably wouldn't advise to cancel HP agreements. That would be legally a little bit suspect. Easy wins in terms of profitability and things that you can do straight away tomorrow is using the telephone to get quotations for anything and everything that you're thinking of buying. If it's you need to top up the diesel tank or even the heating oil tank, if you need some bags of feed, don't be afraid to phone and ask for prices. The other thing that is really easy now, the internet's allowed us to be able to get quotations online. A few people have been successful for the last round of Farm Business Grant, and getting quotations for capital items using the internet is a doddle. And I myself buying some kit through the Farm Business Grant, and there's a difference in some of the items of £1,000 difference for what in essence is exactly the same item between different suppliers. And again, £1,000 is one store animal that I don't need to sell if I can save the money on cost. So yes, you can do something quickly. Phone around for prices. The second thing, if you're livestock and grazing and you're not doing it already, is subdivide some of your fields into smaller areas and get some growth happening behind the animals.
Okay, and another question is, will NVZs impact on the more intensive 170 kilograms per hectare?
Yeah, it will. Yeah, there is certainly going to be quite a big influence on certainly profitability. Perhaps in the dairy sector, obviously going to be more influenced. NRW, after having a meeting with them at the end of last year, their bigger concern is some of the beef and sheep farmers who are producing slurry but actually have no storage systems. So from a profitability point of view, if some of these businesses want to stay in the sector, then there's going to be some investment required, and obviously that will impact on profit. The only thing that I can say as a positive on that is that there are obviously a few MVZ areas already in Wales, and speaking to some of the even quite intensive farms that are farming in the MVZs already, once they've got into the swing of it and once they've got a handle on exactly what they can and can't do, quite a few of those have said that it's made them better farmers and actually made them more efficient. So seeing it not necessarily as a hammer to the head, but as a challenge and as a measure to try and improve efficiency of slurry utilisation, I think there are businesses out there that have definitely benefited to a degree from some of the NVZ rules.
Okay, does shopping around for a milk price help the top third?
One of the key things that we found in our benchmark, and it wasn't one that I put on the slide, but actually, I'm trying to be careful what I say because I know that we've had some difficult times just very recently in terms of milk buyer. But as a very broad generalisation, milk buyer is not a good predictor of profitability. In our data set, which covers about 120 dairy farms, our most profitable dairy farmer sells to first milk, and our least profitable dairy farmer also sells to first milk. They're on exactly the same contract. Their milk price is somewhat different because the quality of the milk and the hygiene standards of the milk is quite different, but they have both got the ability to achieve the headline price. So actually, we spend an awful lot of time talking about milk contracts, and over the last 5 years, milk price hasn't been a good definer of profitability. But I do appreciate that some of the Freshways producers very recently have had an extremely tough time, as have some of the other milk buyers. And yeah, at the moment, there's as big a gap in milk price between top and bottom as there ever has been. But I say, if I took a 10-year view, I would say milk buyer is not necessarily a good driver of profitability.
No, it's a difficult time for everyone at the moment. Another question is, what's better, running old machinery and paying repair bills, or running newer fleet of machinery and paying finance?
Again, it does depend to a degree on the farmer. If you're running new machinery on HP and you look after it, then as long as it's critical equipment and things that I regard as critical equipment, I think on a dairy farm, for example, obviously a telehandler for a lot of the bigger farms is an essential bit of kit. For the housed systems, the feeder wagon can be an essential bit of kit, and the tractor to pull it. So keeping those up to date, perhaps within warranty, is going to be better for those businesses than running old machinery. For businesses that are not running a housed system and maybe a slightly smaller scale, I would say the most profitable businesses I've ever seen are those that tend to run some slightly older machinery that's perhaps come from some of the arable units. So it's maybe got quite a few hours on it, but it's never seen slurry, and it's been well maintained, and they'll do a fantastic job for a livestock farmer for quite a few years. So key kit, try and keep up to date. The stuff that's got to start on the key every day. Some of the stuff that's not used as often, I would definitely go for older machinery and try and be as handy with a spanner as possible.
Of course. Another question, would grazing be more beneficial for high output dairy systems than rely on high yields?
Yes.
Do we have something else?
That's the simple answer, and particularly at the moment where there's pressure on milk price. Again, I've yet to come across anybody who can improve the quality of grass by cutting it and storing it for 6 months. So there is a loss of energy and protein from harvesting grass and storing it. I appreciate that not everybody's farm is set up to be able to go fully grazing, and I'm by no means saying that everybody should be spring calving, but as a real general message, there is more money in utilising grass and getting some cows out than there is in keeping everything in, yes.
Great. Any tips on how to get the older generation to implement change?
Yeah, it can be difficult, and I appreciate it. And some of it is personality driven. I think sometimes some of the older generation, current times make it very difficult because of coronavirus. I tend to find getting the older generation onto a farm walk with a farmer that perhaps they respect and showing them the system in practice can make quite a big difference. If they can actually see it in front of them and see it in practice with a farmer that they've got some respect for, I think that's the easiest way to implement changes with some of the older generation. Showing them literature and websites, I don't think tends to float their boats. I think they want to see it in practice, and a farmer that they've got some respect for who's doing it, I think, is the best way. And I say, while coronavirus is around, it's very difficult, but perhaps when we get back to normality, farm walks on the right farms are a brilliant way of getting people to change.
No, you're quite right. I'd agree there. What options are there to benchmark my business if not in a discussion group? Well, I can partly answer this, is that we've got Measure to Manage with Farming Connect, so they could have their account with Farming Connect, which could help them. But is there anything else that they could be using to benchmark?
There's huge amounts of data out there. Certainly the internet has made it far easier to get hold of some of the data. Quite a few businesses have found first steps in terms of benchmarking easier to benchmark with yourself year on year to start with. So actually, if you've got a set of accounts or you've got some management information, is to compare this year with last year, or to compare the budget to what you actually received, what you actually managed last year. So a good place to start is to compare yourself with yourself. And that works quite well for some businesses where perhaps they're slightly different to some of the other businesses. So maybe they've got a bit more diversification, or maybe they've got a different enterprise to somebody else. So to start with, benchmarking with yourself. Second of all, look on the internet. Hubby Key Cymru have got a lot of benchmarking data on their website. AHDB have got an awful lot of benchmarking on their website, and as Gwen said, Farming Connect are doing an awful lot of benchmarking. The other thing is to sign up for some Farming Connect time to get a consultant to do the benchmarking with you, to talk you through it, and to show you how to prepare the figures. That's 80% funded, would be a real good way of getting started as well.
It would indeed. Another question is, do top third farmers diversify?
Top third farmers tend not to have such a high level of diversification as Mr. Average and Mr. Bottom Third. There's a tendency sometimes, and not in every scenario, but there is a tendency sometimes that diversification can take some people's eyes off the ball. and the farming enterprises sometimes suffer as a consequence. That doesn't apply to all businesses, but in all the data that we've collected for benchmarking, there is a tendency for the top third to be perhaps less diversified.
Okay, any organic farms in the top third?
Yep. The most profitable dairy farm I work with is an organic dairy farm, and just to put it in perspective, he 120 organic dairy cows on a reasonably low input, low output basis. 2 years ago produced exactly the same profit as the 700 cow housed intensive dairy herd that I visited on the same day.
Okay, making a difference can sometimes require financial support. For example, third-party lending. Where do you start with regards to approaching the bank?
Okay, so in terms of dealing with the bank and approaching the bank, there's obviously several key criteria that the bank need covering off. So a business plan is quite a big part of it. That doesn't have to be a 5-year cash flowed or singing or dancing business plan. They want to see a business plan of what is the proposal going to do for your cost base, what is it going to do for your output, and what is it going to do for the bottom line. So to a certain degree, sometimes on a smaller investment, partial budget might do. If it's going to be a big ticket item, then they possibly want to see a bit more detailed budget. So budget is number one. Number two is security. Can you offer the bank either security in terms of an asset that they can have to counterweight against the borrowing, or can you offer any other securities such as maybe life assurances, third-party guarantees, etc. So it's covering off that there's a security to cover the debt. Finally, it's they want some reassurance in terms of previous track record, and reassurance that this is something that maybe someone else has done and has been successful. So it's a budget to show what the expected impact is, security to show that if things don't work out, then their position is covered, and it's reassurance that you have the ability to be able to deliver what you're saying you're going to deliver.
Yeah, and Farming Connect can 80% fund the business plan to take with you to the bank. So that is one step closer then, isn't it? So
that's right.
That's great. Content focused on costs. Are the top third doing anything to address market needs? Identifying new markets? Are they adding additional customer value in any way?
One of the differences within top third and average and bottom third is perhaps market spec. So in terms of lamb and beef, they're getting much more consistent at meeting market spec, and therefore the value of their output is slightly higher. There's probably not enough in any of the data sets of people who are, for example, direct selling, maybe with vending machines, these sort of things. There's not enough data yet to be able to give a fair conclusion on that. But I would say give us another 18 months or so, and I think we'll have a far broader data set to be able to comment on that. Anecdotal evidence from businesses that I've dealt with where there is some value adding, as long as the core business is profitable, yes, it can add profit to the bottom line. I am afraid, though, that the key message is cost control, and I know that it's boring and we've heard it loads of times before, but that is the key difference between top third and bottom third is cost. It isn't value of output. It is actually how much they physically spend.
Next question is, are there any fully housed cows in the top third?
Yes, there are. There are some within our data set. As a consultant, I suppose it's one of the frustrations, but also one of the things that keeps us in a job is that I'd love to be able to just put up a blueprint for each sector to show you what a top third business is, that it is 250 cows out for 6 months, in for 6 months, but we have housed herds in the top third as well as housed herds in the bottom third, the same as we have spring calvers in the top third and spring calvers in the bottom third. It isn't about the system, it's about how well you run the system. The only thing that I will say, and we've been doing our dairy benchmarking in Karen now for around 15 years, the high input, high output housed herds do tend to be the first ones that fall into loss making when milk price drops. And they do tend to be the last ones that get back into profit when milk price starts climbing. So as a housed, high input, high output herd, you do need to make big surpluses in the good times to be able to put some fat on the bone to cover the bad times.
Okay, and final question, I think. What is generally the debt position of the top third? The reason I ask is because it affects the ability to invest and optimize, improve the system.
Yeah, there's no doubt that debt levels are higher on the bottom third than the top third. A lot of it, though, does come down to structure of debt. So you tend to find that the bottom third have perhaps bigger overdrafts and not as much structured debt, so not as much on repayment basis, loan basis. The difference in borrowing is probably not quite, and I can't just bring the figures to my mind at the moment, but the difference in debt is probably not as big as you would have assumed. But the top business, it comes back a little bit to one of the previous questions, you know, what the banks are looking for when you're looking to borrow money. Those top third businesses, because they've got track record and because they've got security, do tend to borrow at a slightly cheaper rate than the bottom third businesses. And it's what the banks will quite happily talk about, risk and reward. So a top third business is a lower risk. So the bank look for a lower reward from that business, i.e. a cheaper interest rate. The average debt on the dairy farm in our data set is, I think it's just under £3,000 a cow. The range is from nothing to, I think, about £6,000 a cow. But we have people borrowing for £4,500 a cow in the top third, and we've got people borrowing only £1,000 a cow in the bottom third. So, yeah.
I've had 2 more questions come in, if it's okay to, are you okay to carry on?
Yeah, fine.
Are some people keeping their profit low to keep their tax bill down?
The figures, yes, from tax accounts, there are some people keeping their profits down to save tax. All the figures that I've referenced tonight, though, are management accounts, so these are not what are put in front of the taxman, and there is generally a difference between what you would show on your management accounts to what would you show on your tax accounts. I still hold, though, that within your tax accounts, there are certain things that you can do to reduce the profit. So they are things like perhaps putting some building renewals down as repairs, capital investment to keep the tax bill down. Generally, every penny that you've spent and every penny that you've banked have been allocated somewhere within your accounts. Otherwise, it's tax avoidance. So I can see what the question's suggesting, but most businesses' accounts are a reasonable reflection of the performance of that business, if that's fair.
Yeah. Are your group of farmers even the top? Are your group of farmers even the bottom third above average?
No. And one thing that I do have to state is that as consultants, we do tend to see probably actually less of the average farm, and we tend to see both ends of the spectrum. So we have a lot of businesses that would use a consultant because they're in the top third and want to stay there and want to keep pushing. We also have quite a few customers who use a consultant because the bank manager has asked them to take some outside advice, or they're in a stressed position needing assistance. So actually our data set includes probably more top third and more bottom third than perhaps the Farm Business Survey data. We don't tend to see a huge amount of Mr. Average because they're happy where they are, they're not bothering the bank, and they're not particularly wanting to push the business forward. So we do see more top third, but we see also more bottom third than perhaps you would expect.
Okay, what's the average debt of the circular system?
The average, well, if we take Farm Business Survey data, and they don't break it down necessarily to just sucklers, but the average debt, looking at the numbers, is around 120,000. But remember, to get to an average debt of 120,000, that'll mean that some have got none and some have got $250,000.
Okay, and is 6,000 per cow debt worrying in your opinion?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Less is more in terms of borrowings. There's no doubt. You know, we all at times have to invest, whether you know, the tractor needs changing because it's failing, whether the buildings have come to the end of their useful life, and so we all do have to borrow. But £6,000 a cow is too much.
Yes. Well, that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much, John, for a very informative evening.